we investigate this so-called marriage, we found out that there were some elements that were lacking. Therefore, there was no marriage to begin with. It's null. Null and void. You never were married. Whatever happened, however many kids you had, whatever that was, it wasn't a marriage. Do you understand that? Now, what are those conditions? Talk to a canon lawyer. I don't know all the details. But I will say this. What I do know is if there's not full consent of the will at the time of the marriage. For example, I'm a 16-year-old girl. My boyfriend's gotten me pregnant. My parents forced me to marry the boy because they're not going to have any shame in their family. You made this problem, girl, you're going to marry the boy, and he's going to take care of you. Is that a legitimate marriage? No, because I, the 16-year-old girl, have no say in this. I'm being forced into it by my parents. I don't have full consent of the will. Now that's a very extreme example. But the point is, it's those kinds of things that the church investigates by talking to the people that are involved in the marriage. So back to me in my first marriage, you know, that I'm trying to get annulled. Well, they need to find that woman, find out what happened, what caused the divorce, what's going on, why did we get married in the first place? I mean, there's a whole tribunal that comes up to investigate that. What if the church decides, you know what, everything is there. It was a legit marriage. It sticks. That's exactly right. And the person I'm married to is an illegitimate marriage. Because now I'm married to two people. One legitimately and one illegally, if you will. Illegitimately. You see that? So that's a whole other ball of wax. The point is, this exception clause has nothing to do with adultery. That's how Protestants interpret this. They say that if there's unfaithfulness in the marriage, that could be grounds for a divorce. If one of the spouses is unbelieving, that could be grounds for divorce, a legitimate divorce. These are all exceptions Protestants come up with. And I know because I was there, I would hear them. Okay? But that has nothing to do with what Jesus is saying here. Proof, read verse 10. The disciples said to him, if such is the case of a man with his wife, it is not expedient to marry. In other words, Jesus, if you're expecting us to be in this till death do us part, that's too much. And by the way, a lot of the apostles, including Peter, were married. So it's like Jesus is saying, boys, you're not getting out of this. Got it? So the fact that the disciples react the way they do shows that Jesus has elevated the status of marriage to this high position that it originally had, but fell into this, was permitted by God to allow divorce and remarriage. Because why? The hardness of men's hearts. But that was before Jesus came and dealt with the sin issue. Now we've dealt with the sin issue, we go back to what it was in the beginning. That's basically what Jesus is saying. So that's the whole grounds for it. Okay? Can we put marriage to bed now? Thank you. Figuratively and then literally. Let's get to Revelation 13. All right. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to speak up for Rebecca. Those of you who purchased this, I hope you are enjoying the panorama of pictures. If you want to order one for yourself, Rebecca will take orders. However, she needs at least 10 of you to order them because there's a discount that comes with that. If 10 of y'all order it at once, They're only $20 each. That right? Yep. Okay. So there you are on that. Where are we? We are in Revelation chapter 13. And I want to share a little bit, which is part of the reason why I did the meditation we did on our rosary. I've been meditating on this whole idea of Revelation 12 and 13, and I want to share with you a little insight. Just a little insight that came up at the Catholic Answers Conference indirectly. They didn't mention this, but while in the process of the conference, this clicked, and I was like, oh, it was like a revelation. Couldn't resist. In Revelation 12, we talked about, Michael fighting against the devil and all that, and how this is like a recapitulation of the eternal struggle that's happened since before time and until the end of time. That Satan is forever falling from heaven whenever the kingdom of God advances. Remember I mentioned all of that? Well, go to Revelation 12, verse 13. I want you to see this idea because it leads into Revelation 13. And it was, I don't know, to me it was a big insight. I hope you get it too. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown to earth, he pursued the woman who had borne the male child. Okay? But the woman was given 2 great wings of an eagle, that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to a place where she is to be nourished for a time, times and a half time. Okay? The serpent poured water like a river out of its mouth after the woman to sweep her away. But the earth came to the help of the woman and opened its mouth and swallowed the river. Verse 17. The dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. She gave birth to 1 male child, but now she has other offspring. Who are they? Those who keep the commandments of God and bear the testimony to Jesus. Okay. What comes right after this? Then he stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. We went over that. Verse 4. Men worship the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who can fight against it. Okay, what's the great insight, Chip? Okay, now turn to Genesis 3:15. Oh, I'm getting excited about it. I don't know if it's because the air kicked in, but I'm getting goosebumps about this. I love this. I love this. Genesis 3. This is the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. Start with verse 14. The Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all cattle, above all wild animals. Upon your bellies shall you go and eat the dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, this is the great proto-evangelion, right? The first gospel. The first promise God gives that he's going to send a redeemer, right? The seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head. Amen? Now, notice the first part. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. So the serpent has, if you will, children as well, seed, descendants, as does the woman, right? It makes sense now why this image is here in Revelation 12. Revelation 12 describes the woman and her seed, her offspring, which is who? Those who keep the commandments of God and bear testimony to Jesus. What starts in Revelation 13? The seed of the devil. The 2 beasts. And those that follow the beast. Ooh, I just got goosebumps again. I love it. This is a reenactment in a more dramatic way of the first promise God ever gave. Do you see that? And I'm like, the beasts, the two beasts that follow are the offspring of the devil, of the serpent. And those that follow him are those. In contrast to what? Those offspring of the woman and her seed, the male child. You get it? I'm like, so this whole section of Revelation 12 and 13 is the plan of the ages in a very subtle, not so subtle, in a very dramatic and succinct image form. So we talk about the fall of fallen angels in heaven and the righteous angels under Michael. We go to the woman and her offspring, the new Adam, the new Eve, and those that follow, the church. And now we get into those that are the seed of the devil, those that follow him. All right, and I'm going to turn off the air because I'm getting cold. This is not just chill. Yeah. Well, I don't want this to run anyway, so we do need to find some way of turning this off because it's just pulling power like you don't know what's in the church. It's not cooperating, so we're going to be cold. It's not cooperating. If
it was on when we opened up, it was already on.
could someone take it upon themselves to contact Gretchen tomorrow in the office and make sure that this gets turned off? Because like you said, if it was on when you got here, something is wrong with the settings and it needs to be turned off because this is costing the church a lot and we don't need it. Especially now. Yeah, thank you. Great minds think alike. All right. So anyway, let's continue with chapter 13. Let's get into the beast. Last week, we talked about the first beast. And I spent a lot of time talking about my understanding of what I believe the Antichrist will be like. We talked about how this is not just the big A Antichrist, but it also is representative of the little a Antichrists that will appear down through history between now and the end of time when the big boy A arrives. Does everyone understand what I'm talking about? There are two versions of the Antichrist. There's the little version that will happen since the time of Jesus until he comes back. Then there's one specific Antichrist at the end of time. That is what is being talked about here. Both of them. They're describing both of them. All right? It is my understanding, it is just that, it is my understanding, so it's my opinion, that all this 3.5 years stuff, did you turn it off? Good, keep it on. Thank you. But I still say you should talk to Gretchen and find out. It shouldn't be that difficult. I've never had that problem before. It might be on a timer or something and someone just needs to undo it. So if you wouldn't mind, that would be great. Thank you. But thank you, Connie, for getting it off, for turning it off. That's great. The 3.5 years that's described here, the woman that goes into the wilderness for a times and a half time, did you catch that? Mm-hmm. The 2 witnesses in Revelation 11, how long do they prophesy? 42 months or 1,260 days, which all adds up to what? 3.5 years. So when we get to the beast, this beast is also about 3.5 years. Look at verse 5. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. So we see this repetition since chapter 11. Chapter 11 of what? The same amount of time. We either have 42 months, 1,260 days, we have a time, times, and a half time. Okay? These are all saying the same thing. A time, times, a half. These are all 3.5 year periods. So there's something to be said about the last 3.5 years, if you will, of the world. And it centers around this Antichrist figure and his persecution of the church. They're definitely connected. Okay? And how do you know that? Verse 6. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemy against God, blaspheming in his name, his dwelling, and that is those who are in heaven. It was also allowed to make war with the saints and to conquer them. So at the end of time, this is part of that final purge that is mentioning in the Catechism, I believe, under the reign of the Antichrist. You like